I'm a community outreach specialist at BISC. We also have Jade Miyashiro. She's our little fire ant technician. And we have Molly Murphy. She works in our Plant Pono program. And we also have Franny Brewer, who's going to be doing our talk today. Franny is a graduate of Hilo, and she's actually been working on rat lungworm for a few years now with Kay Howe and the folks at the Jarvie Lab. And Franny has been working on getting rat lungworm education out to the public schools through the garden programs. And yeah, this is our second time doing our webinar with this Zoom format. And so everyone on the call is automatically muted. So if you have a question, please feel free to type it into the Q&A or the chat. Jade and Molly will be keeping an eye on that. And so we are also streaming this webinar live on Facebook. So if anyone has any questions, you can type your questions in and I'll get those questions to Franny. And so we are recording this webinar, and our plan is to post this to our website by the end of the week, so you guys can go back and watch it. And I think that's it for the housekeeping. Take it away, Franny.
Great. Thanks, Kavehi. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. All right, so I am going to share my screen. All right. That is not working. Try again. All right, can we see it now? Got it?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. All right, thank you all for being here today. Thanks for the introductions, Kavehi. And we are going to be talking about rat lungworm today. Rat lungworm is kind of the catch-all phrase that we use to describe both the parasite and the disease that it causes. It is caused by a nematode worm, a parasite that is named Angiostrongylus cantonensis. That's its Latin name, so it's a real little teeny animal. And the disease that is caused by Angiostrongylus cantonensis is called Angiostrongylus. And we sort of just use rat lungworm as the term that covers both of those things, but they are obviously a little bit different. So we're going to kind of break that down. First thing to understand about the Angiostrongylus and the Angiostrongylus cantonensis is that there's a life cycle for this parasite, and it needs to have two hosts in order to go through the life cycle. Most of us are pretty familiar with the fact that it's something to do with rats, and then also slugs and snails. So how this works is that part of the life cycle is spent in a rat, and part of the life cycle is spent in a slug or snail. And the majority of the life cycle is actually in a rat. So the rat is known as the definitive host. That's where the organism begins its life cycle, and that's where it ends its life cycle, which is reproduction. And in between those times, there's sort of this little sideways turn where it ends up in a slug or a snail. So it does start in the rat heart. That is where the male and female worms will meet, date, fall in love, have babies. This is actual video of a rat heart, and you can see the white and red candy stripe worm. That's a female. She has, the white is the ovaries, that's where she's gonna lay the eggs, and the red is the blood, because they are sucking the blood from the host. So they will meet, and they will, she will lay eggs, and those eggs will be in the lungs of the rat. The rat's gonna cough the eggs up and kind of get in the mouth, and then swallow them, and they're gonna go through the digestive system. End up in the rat poop. A snail comes along, or a slug comes along, eats the rat poop, and picks up those larvae in the rat poop. Turns out, not only do snails find rat poop to be a tasty snack, but rats find snails to be a tasty snack. So what ends up happening is that the organism goes back into the rat, and it's able to complete the life cycle. So this is the definitive way that the thing has to grow. It cannot complete its life cycle if it only ends up in one or the other of these organisms. It gets stuck at a certain stage. And the stage that is most important to us as humans is the third stage. That's the stage at which it's in the slug or snail. So the first couple of stages, it's in the rat, comes out of the rat in the poop, gets eaten by the slug or snail, and then becomes L3 or third stage larvae. And that's what you're seeing in these pictures here. At that point, you see on the bottom right, it's kind of curled up. These are microscope slides that were provided by the Jarvie lab at the College of Pharmacy. And what will happen is the little worm is going to remain dormant inside the slug or snail in that little curled up state until it's activated by stomach acid. That's what's going to be the signal to let it know, oop, time to move around and get going and get ready for our next stage of life. So this is the stage that is most dangerous for us. If we encounter rat lungworm in other stages, it's not going to cause disease, but this L3 larvae is the stage that's we have the most problems. Okay, so again, there's your life cycle. It goes back and forth between the rat and the slug or snail, but sometimes something comes along and interrupts that life cycle. So on one side, we have paratenic hosts. And so paratenic hosts might come into contact with the slug or snail and pick up that larvae, and then they will carry it in their tissues. If you were to eat a paratenic host raw, then you could contract rat lungworm disease because the larvae is in that L3 stage, that's in that third stage, but it's not going to complete its life cycle inside one of these. Now, if they got eaten by a rat, it could complete its life cycle. So you can see the paratenic host can serve as a reservoir for those larvae. They can still provide a food source, but we generally wouldn't catch it from a paratenic host unless we were eating them raw. So cook your cookies, don't eat them raw. If another type of host comes along and does eat a slug or snail with that L3 stage, or a paratenic host with that L3 stage inside of its tissues, it is an accidental or dead end host, because inside of these creatures like us, dogs, horses, orangutans, some bird species, the organism cannot complete its life cycle, but this is where it causes disease because it's trying to complete its life cycle. It wants to get to a rat heart and mate and create babies, and it's going through the body trying to find that space, and it's not going to be able to find that space. So this is where we end up having severe problems. Rat lungworm, you've heard a lot about it, especially if you're living on the Big Island, you're living in Hawaii, you've heard a lot about it over, the last decade or so. And it might seem like, oh, this is new, but it's a disease that's probably pretty ancient. That whole life cycle is very, very well established. And so it takes a long time to come up with a life cycle like that in nature. But we first learned about the disease when the worm was found in the rats back in the 1930s by a doctor and a researcher in China. And the area of China at the time was named Canton. And so you get that name, cantonensis. Then at some point, there was movement of snails, particularly African snails, which are a really good carrier of this parasite. And they moved all around the world, particularly during World War II, when there was a lot of equipment and shipments of things moving around. And in Taiwan, the first known case of disease was identified in 1945. That doesn't mean that's the first time that a human was infected. That's just the first time that someone figured out that this sickness that someone came down with was caused by this particular worm and made the connection. And we actually had our first cases of disease in 1959 and 1960 here in Oahu. So the disease has actually been in Hawaii for quite a long time. We know that for sure, but it never seems to have reached the level that we're seeing lately, and we'll get into why that is. But rat lungworm is a disease that's been spreading around the world. We know at least 30 countries it's present. That little box, 2,800 known cases of human infection, it's actually likely much higher than that because it's often misdiagnosed, and it's very difficult to get a good number of cases because of the complexity, and it's not always identified. Here in Hawaii, you're like, wow, if you lived here 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you're thinking, I never heard of this. It really started to grow in the early 2000s, where we started to see higher and higher cases of severe disease. And you can see even, those two different columns. One is showing you numbers as reported by the Department of Health, and one is showing you numbers as reported by Hawaii Health Information. And so they don't even line up because there's different reporting criteria. Some people never get to the stage of getting a spinal tap, and so their cases might not be counted. So it's hard to really determine exactly how many cases, but what you can see even with both numbers is that there's been an increase in severe disease in Hawaii. Now, why do we think that is? We think that that's associated with the arrival of this invasive species, the semi-slug, Parmarian martensi. This, if you're lucky enough to have seen one of these ugly things, you know that they come in big numbers when they move into your area. The first time it was spotted was in 1996 on Oahu. It was probably accidentally brought in, or the eggs were accidentally brought in on a potted plant, a shipment of potted plants, just something, you know, like a house plant. And at some point it got to the Big Island. They know for sure it was in the Big Island. In 2004, the first specimen was collected, but people, where it was collected, the properties, people said, oh, I've been seeing that slug for a few years. So they know for sure that it was around for a while. And from about 2000, which is when people reported the first sightings, to 2010, it became very widespread. So very aggressive reproducer, aggressive spreader, typical of introduced species that become invasive. When we consider it invasive, it's you know, something that's become a problem. And it's actually spread to Maui. Just a couple of years ago, we had the first report on Maui. It isn't in every location on the Big Island yet, but we had the first detection in Kohala just last year. And that was because we had worked with the schools, and we had a bunch of teachers who came to a professional development class to learn about rat lungworm and then teach it to their students, teach about all the science aspects and, you know, how to stay healthy. And one of the teachers texted us this picture and said, we found a weird slug. What is this guy? And that was the first time we knew that the semi-slug had made it to Kohala. And unfortunately, just within a couple weeks of that, someone in Kohala came down with a really severe case of rat lungworm. So you can kind of see that the movement, that was the first case in Kohala that was known to be from Kohala. And so the movement of the semi-slug seems to be associated with the movement of disease. Same thing when it turned up in Maui, we started seeing more severe cases in Maui. So scientists are still working on what the exact link is, but there's a few different things about the semi-slug that make it a really good vector. So first, it's one of the things, you can see it at the top of the kava bowl right there. That's not normal behavior for a slug. And in fact, we had pretty severe cases here in Keau just a few years ago. A family had made kava in their backyard, as they had done previously. It had never been a problem before. The next day, they drank the kava and got to the bottom of the bowl, and there was dead slugs in the bottom of the bowl. 6 members of that family came down with severe cases of rat lungworm disease. And this was really associated with these slugs. No one has seen slugs before crawl deliberately into some kind of liquid that you're working with or you're drinking and then drown themselves. So that was kind of unusual behavior. These slugs, rather than just being out in the garden or sort of out in the plants, which is normally where you find a lot of your other types of slugs and snails, these will actually try to come towards human activity. And I've had long discussions with one of the researchers here on rat lungworm as to whether or not infection with the parasite actually causes them to act this way, because it's such an odd behavior. But I personally live in Puna, where we have a lot of semi-slugs, and in the rainy season, I will find them trying to get into, they will come into the house. I've had the really good experience of putting my hand on the railing to put on my shoes and like putting my fingers into a semi-slug, which is one of the worst possible situations you can have. It's really not fun, but they're very fast, and they sort of just come out of nowhere and come towards humans. And so that's really unusual for a slug or snail. So that puts them more into contact with humans than we would maybe with some other slugs or snails. So we think that there's a relationship there with this particular slug's behavior and why we see more disease. They're also fast. I know that sounds really strange, but you can see there's a Cuban slug, which is one of the more common slugs we have around here, on top, and then the semi-slug on bottom. And of course I speeded it up, that's why it's so jumpy, but you can just see comparatively how much faster. You know, we usually think of slugs as being slow, and this guy is not as slow as maybe the slugs that we're used to and the snails that we're used to. So yeah, there he goes, Speedy, with his toenail fungus semi-snail shell on top. So they're fast moving. They also carry a very high parasite load. So these slugs can have a lot of parasites per body weight, right? So there's a lot of them. So even if you just were to get a snippet of a tail, there could be a lot of parasites in there. And researchers do think there's a relationship between the number of parasites that you get in your body and the potential for you to get more severe disease. And you know, that's just a matter of numbers. The more worms you have moving around in your body, the more chance there is that they're gonna find something they can damage and cause that damage. We also know there's a high percentage of semi-slugs that are infected with rat lungworm. And what I mean by this is, so this is research, this is from Nora Young at Bishop Museum, a malacologist who studies snails and slugs. So what a malacologist does. And you can see that, you know, all of these different snails and slugs that they capture, different species, they all had some amount of rat lungworm. So, you know, over here you have, you know, these little snails or whatever, that they had 20%, 10% of the snails and slugs that were collected were infected with rat lungworm. But Parmaria martensi, the semi-slug, over 70%. And on the Big Island around Hilo and Puna, it's closer to between 90 and 100% of the semi-slugs that have been collected by the Jarvie lab have had rat lungworm. So the chances are, if you are if the snail or slug you happen to encounter is a rat lungworm or is a semi-slug, almost guaranteed that it has the rat lungworm parasite in it. Whereas if it's a different kind of snail or slug, the chances are lower. So again, that makes it more likely to be a vector for disease. So we have a high percentage of infection, and they also create a lot of slime. And this is something that's, you know, all slugs and snails create slime, but these guys create a lot of it. And they can actually sort of create these masses that protect them during the dry season, so they can group together, get all their slime together, and be protected, and so keep the population going even in times when other snails or slugs might have died out because it was dry. So we see this grouping behavior, not sure exactly, but probably that kind of functional way to survive through certain seasons. And unfortunately, there are parasites in the slime. We don't know if that's enough, and I'll talk about this a little more. We don't know if that's enough to cause disease, but there are parasites in there. So before I go to the next, I'll finish up with this. So we know that the semi-slugs are a really good vector, but I want to say that any slug or snail can carry rat lungworm, any, including our natives, which are endangered. So it's pretty unfortunate. That's, you know, one more risk or threat to our native snails, but any slug or snail has the potential to carry rat lungworm. Is there any questions coming in that we should cover? No? Okay, we're good. Okay, so now we'll get a little bit more into disease. Most cases of Angiostrongylus resolve without medical intervention. They're mild. The worms never make it past your gastrointestinal system, and so there's this flu-like kind of feeling. Most people don't even know that what they had was rat lungworm. And there's a little bit of support for this. The Jarvie lab has been working on a blood test for the antibodies to see who, you know, has been infected. And about 40% of the folks that voluntarily gave their blood in Puna had said they had never had rat lungworm and came up positive for the rat lungworm antibodies. So that's, you know, indicating that there is mild disease and a lot of people won't know. But if they get into different parts of the body, there could be, if they're in your joints or your skin, you could start to get sensations there. These are actual microscopic worms that are in the body. So you can imagine what that kind of might feel like. The real danger comes if the worms make it to the central nervous system. So if they're making it into the spinal column and the brain, then you're going to have problems that are severe. So the first sort of indication of meningitis, and this would come 4 to 5 days usually after infection, where someone actually ingests the slug or snail that's infected with rat lungworm, is stiff neck. Beyond that, like beyond the headache and stiff neck, and some people don't even get the headache at all, but that's the first indicator of meningitis. Unfortunately, the symptoms can range so wildly depending on what part of the brain or what part of the body the worms end up in. It causes lots of different reactions by the body, and a lot of the reaction comes from and we hear this right now with COVID-19, the body's reaction, the inflammation, because the body's reacting to this invader, that also leads to a lot of these problems. So unfortunately, everyone's reaction is different, and it's easy to misdiagnose rat lungworm. Medical professionals who don't see a lot of it, and especially if they're on the mainland, a tourist comes here and goes home on vacation, they're going to their doctor. The doctor has no idea what this is, has never heard of this disease. But some of the more common symptoms that are reported among a lot of the folks who've had rat lungworm: urinary retention, paralysis of various body parts, loss of balance, lots of reports of impacts to the eyes, and then memory loss, confusion, hallucinations, things that, you know, would happen when you're having damage being done to the brain. And pretty universal is the pain. You know, the survivors talk about pain even years after being infected. So a severe case of rat lungworm is rare, but it is terrible when it happens. So again, this is not a comprehensive list of symptoms. This is some of the more common ones, but it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. Okay, and I'm not a medical professional, which is why I'm just giving you sort of the general information. The main take home is that it can be very serious. So the important thing to remember is that if you have any reason to think that you may have gotten a snail or slug and swallowed a snail or slug, or part of a snail or slug, seek medical attention immediately. Do not wait until symptoms appear. There are things, the earlier that medical treatment begins, and hopefully before any symptoms appear, the much better the outcome of the case is. There are guidelines because the state has worked to try and come up with these preliminary guidelines. They are due to be updated hopefully soon, but they're kind of not out there for every medical professional. Like, they can go onto the Department of Health website and dig around and find it. But, you know, sometimes in Hawaii, we have people that, you know, come to Hawaii for a rotation of 6 months or a year or something and are kind of new. So we recommend that if you think you have rat lungworm, or you're going to the hospital with someone who thinks they might have encountered a slug or snail that could be infected, that you print these out and take them with you, or be prepared to show them to the medical professional, just so that you can get them up to speed, because it is something that in the past we've had a lot of people who were not properly diagnosed, and unfortunately the disease progressed beyond where it should have and caused very, very severe long-term problems. So we actually, this might be a little difficult to find on the Department of Health, so we've posted it at the top of our website, bisc.org/RLW for the rat lungworm. So easy to find if you ever need to find it. Also there you'll find, this was released in January, we had a conference here in Hawaii. It was the first time that here in Hilo we hosted the Rat Lungworm International Workshop. So we had researchers from all over the world come, and there were medical professionals from all over Hawaii. And one of the things that came out that they do in other countries is immediately after ingestion, if you think you've ingested a snail or slug, take this over-the-counter pinworm medication. I think it's $15. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it at Long's, you can get it at any drugstore. So the pinworm, the active ingredient is parental pamoate. And again, this is on our website. There's the little thing you can connect to the Hilo Medical Center alert about this. And that parental pamoate will help if you take it within about the first 4 to 6 hours after you've ingested a slug or snail, because that will paralyze them. It doesn't kill them, but it'll paralyze those worms in your gastrointestinal system, so you can then pass them out rather than them getting through your stomach lining and going crazy in your body and causing damage. So I bought this and I just keep it in my medicine cabinet. so that I don't have to, should something happen, I get texts and calls from people that are like, oh my God, I think I just, may have eaten a slug. If that happens, it's right there. I don't have to try and find a store. We had a case of this where someone, it happened on, she ate something on New Year's Day or New Year's Eve. And so she was having a really hard time finding a place to go and get medicine. So make sure that you are, prepared. It's pretty stable, so you can have it in your medicine cabinet for a fairly long time, and it's just there in case anything happens. But you'll want to take that right away. After a couple of days, it doesn't do anything. But there are other medical treatments, prescription drugs that you can get if you go to a doctor or hospital. And that's within these preliminary diagnosis, and preliminary guidelines. That's where you'll find that information. Okay. Any questions? Are we good? Everybody good? Great. Okay, so how do we not get to that point? How do we prevent having that encounter? Well, we want to reduce our risk. And so there's a lot of different steps you can take to reduce your risk. And if you're a grower, do any kind of gardening or agriculture, you know about integrated pest management, or IPM. And so there's a lot of steps to reduce your invasion from pests, and not just slugs or snails. There's, every pest that could possibly be in your garden. There's different procedures. But one is being really proactive in getting rid of them. So going into your garden, going into your backyard and checking for slugs and snails. And when you find them, disposing of them. So that's, the easiest, most straightforward thing is just find them and get rid of them. We usually recommend that when you're doing what we call a slug hunt, that you, protect yourself so you don't end up with the fun experience that I have had where you actually get semi-slug under your fingernails. So, wearing gloves, we should all have plenty of gloves these days, and really knowing the signs of slug or snail invasion in your garden so that when you see them, you're aware, hey, those bad guys are here. I got to get them out. So looking for them. You can also attract the slugs or snails to a certain spot in your garden. So we've done this with students where we have them set up these traps, and they test different kinds of materials to see what's going to work for the slugs or snails they have in their garden. And you put a little wet cat food underneath there to get them coming, make it nice and damp and moist under there. And during the day, they're looking for a place to shelter. They're looking for a place to get out of the sun, just kind of keep themselves cool and moist. So if you make a cool, moist area, with a top on top of it, you can get them to come in by putting the wet cat food. Once the first slugs and snails start to come, the rest will follow those slime trails. They can actually, there's a chemical signature that they can use. So you get it started. Once it's started, they'll keep coming. And in the morning, you go out, you lift up your shelter, and you pluck everybody out of there. Again, just a reminder, we like to avoid touching them with your hands, just in case you don't want to have something on your hands and accidentally touch your face and maybe get that in your mouth. So we teach kids to do this. This is something we have taught kids down to second grade. Even there's some kindergarten teachers who have done this, and it's a great behavior to teach kids that when you're working around these guys, you have to not touch them. And so you put gloves on, use chopsticks, use tongs to keep yourself safe. How to dispose of them. So we generally recommend using a slug jug when you're out in the garden. It's a jug of salt water, 1 part salt, 6 parts water. That's about 15% salt. So a lot of people say, oh, can we use seawater? Seawater is about 3% at most. So it's not salty enough. So you need really heavily salty water. And you go out there with your tongs, you find those little guys and you stick them into your slug jug. Just recently, I was talking with one of the researchers, the mycologist at Bishop Museum, who said, this is kind of a cruel method. If possible, she suggested using boiling hot water and sort of putting them in the jar and then pouring boiling hot water. So if you're looking for a more humane method of doing it, that's also an option. Not everybody is going to necessarily have access to boiling water in their garden. So we do use the salt jugs, actually hunt semi-slugs. I hunt in the evening. And then, you know, when you kind of have a jug of disgusting slugs, whether it's boiling water or salt or whatever you have, after a while it starts to stink. I use my salt jug as a weed killer. You can just dump these dead, once they're fully dead, give it about a week to make sure that all the parasites are also dead. And then you can pour it out on some grass that you don't like. You know, I'm in Pune, so there's plenty of unoccupied lots nearby that are growing all kinds of invasive plants. Or you know, if you have some gravelly area, or just, you know, close it up tight and throw it in the trash. But this is one way to kind of dispose of those slugs and snails without mixing them in with anything else. Again, with integrated pest management, you know, we talked about creating a shelter that's a nice damp space for those slugs and snails to go to. Think about, where do I see nice damp spaces where they might be going that I don't want them to go? And so you want to reduce habitat. So, you know, getting rid of sort of any kind of debris piles, or, you know, like vegetation like this, palm fronds, they drop a lot of biological material. That's a great habitat. So just really keeping that stuff clean, especially around any place that you're growing any kind of food, right? So raised garden beds, that's going to create, I mean, they can climb, but each step that you take is going to reduce the number of slug and snail contacts that are possible. So you're doing multiple things. That's what integrated pest management is all about. You're doing multiple things to just keep, you know, putting one more barrier in front of them and reducing the number that are going to be around. And then, you know, there's also control. And so we haven't talked, you know, rats are very difficult to control. They're really clever, but it's always good to try and control rats around your house for a number of reasons. Even though you can't catch rat lungworm from a rat, you can catch other diseases from rats. And you know, if you're growing anything, they're just a pest, and they're a terrible invasive species in Hawaii, one of the worst offenders that we have. I like this trap. It's kind of expensive. It's about $120, but it's a pretty humane way, and it doesn't involve any kind of poison. And it's the Good Nature A24 rat trap. It just puts a bolt through the head, dead rat, and then the next rat comes along and does it again. So very handy little thing. If you have an orchard or something like that, you get a few of these. But we really focus on controlling the slugs and snails because that is the direct vector for disease, and they're just a little easier to control in a small area than rats. Rats can range really far. Again, they're really clever. So, you know, some sluggo. Be careful if you have animals. Sluggo is pet safe, but there's another very effective but dangerous one if you have animals around that could eat the bait. I think it's metaldehyde is the active ingredient. So just be careful with reading the label of any pesticide that you use. Sluggo is organic, so you can use it in your garden. So that would be another way to control slugs and snails. Even if you're not growing, even if you're not out in the garden, there are some behaviors you should really think about. One thing that we've seen a lot, these are my cats, but we haven't seen too much rat lungworm in cats, and I've actually talked to different vets. I have one vet that absolutely swears had 2 cases of rat lungworm in a cat, another vet who says, no, I'm not convinced that was rat lungworm. So it's not clear, but the cats just, this is actually my dog's food bowl, and the cats just came to see what I was doing with it. This is not them. This is not their food bowl. But the main thing we see is that dogs are very susceptible to rat lungworm. And so you don't want to have the food outside if you can, or if you do have outside animals and you are feeding them outside, do it in the morning, do it during the day, and pull those bowls at night when the slugs and snails come out, so that there's less risk, especially dogs, you know, the way they're gulping their food down. If there's something, you know, in that bowl, there's slug or snail, they're not going to notice it. They're just going to keep going. So we end up with a lot of cases of rat lungworm in dogs, and sometimes fatal. So it's something to really think about protecting your pets. As you can see, this is a little pup on the left side there. It's having trouble with the back legs, the hind legs. This is from one of our local vets. That movement where they lose movement, that's really common across all of the dogs that they see, and even horses, where they'll get this like lack of movement and paralysis in the hindquarters that makes it really difficult for them. So that's a telltale sign. If you have a pet that starts acting ill and you see that, you got to get them to the vet right away so that they can start the course of treatment. Unfortunate that is something that does affect our pets. Another thing that you can think about is like, where are you getting your water source? So this is from the Hawaii Department of Health when they were doing a snail slug inspection on a property, and they found these Cuban slugs all curled up inside a hose. Remember, they are looking for moisture. And so if that's the moist place, then that's where they're gonna go. So putting a nozzle on your hose where they can't get in, that will protect the water that's coming out of your hose. A couple of years ago, when I first started working on rat lungworm, my daughter was playing in the backyard and she was kind of muddy, and she went to come in the house, and my husband said, "What are you doing?" She said, I want to get a glass of water. And he said, "Just drink out of the hose," you know, which is what we all did as kids, right? But I threatened to divorce him at that point because I've told him about the danger of rat lungworm, and it's no longer a safe behavior. And that's one of the things that when you have an invasive species come in, especially something like this that potentially causes severe disease, behaviors that we could do 10 or 20 years ago, it's not safe anymore. And so we have to think about, how do we adjust our behaviors to keep ourselves safe? And so that's one of the little things that sort of nobody thought of until they discovered, oh, look at these guys, they're inside the hose. So preventing them from getting in, and then you know, just being careful around that. Semi-slugs in particular will get into even the most tightly capped catchment tank. They're pretty amazing at what they can do. And again, this isn't the best example, this picture over here, because a clear liquid, if it had a slug in it, you'd see it. But if you're drinking a beer, especially in a dark bottle or something, these guys are fast. They're really, you gotta be really careful. If it's evening and you put down a mug of beer or something, you could end up with a slug on the bottom. I had a frantic call from a friend last year who was brushing her teeth outside. She was kind of in a camping situation, and was rinsing and came to the bottom of her cup, and there was a semi-slug in the bottom of the cup. So being really careful about when you're outdoors and you have any kind of liquids, especially at night, right around dusk, they start to come out. That's when you really want to pay attention. So putting a cover on your drink, just really being cautious about what you're drinking, that you're looking at it. And then the catchment water, we know that the parasites can be in catchment water. The semi-slugs will exude parasites when they drown. That has been proven in the lab, where they have drowned semi-slugs and then recaptured for days after, parasites swimming in the water that the drowned slug had been in. So this can happen in a catchment tank where slugs will drown, or just, we've seen slugs be swimming in the water for about 2 hours or more and not die. And there are parasites being exuded from their slime. So that's in the catchment. Whether anyone has ever gotten a severe case of rat lungworm from catchment water, we don't know. A lot of cases of rat lungworm disease are it's not possible to know what the incident was that caused the disease. And so, we're just looking at Puna and Hilo and saying, wow, there's just this high incidence. We have the semi-slug here. What else is going on? Well, in Puna, we have about 70+% folks are on catchment water. So is this a problem? We don't know, but we do know that there can be parasites in the catchment water. So the main thing you want to do is you really want to maintain your catchment water. And, people get really caught up in like, oh my God, what is the perfect system? What is the perfect catchment system? Filters, have filters on your catchment, and often change them, right? Keep on top of that, because rat lungworm is not the only waterborne disease that folks in Hawaii get from catchment water. There's a number of them. You can go on the Department of Health website and scare yourself a little bit. So just be really careful. There is a research project that was done by the Jarvie Lab, and they've put out this card. This is available on our website to download, or at the end of this, we can get your address and mail it to you if you're interested in getting this card. They only tested a handful, because they had limited funding. They tested a handful of different filters, and they found that there was a 5-micron carbon block, which blocked out almost all of the larvae. Not all of the filters were as effective, but all of them blocked some percentage of larvae. So having a well-maintained catchment system with filters is better than not paying attention to it, right? So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like, make sure that you're maintaining your catchment system. If you don't have the perfect system right now, you can work towards that. But it is important to know that these slugs and snails can exude parasites. This is just two different, this isn't even semi-slugs. These are two different types of slugs that were drowned, and it shows you how many larvae were in the water. So this cubensis, this Cuban slug, after 7 hours, they found 1,064 larvae in the water, and then, going down how many hours. So for a long time, for days after, there were still larvae in the water alive. So it is something you should definitely be careful of. If you've had water sitting outside, you don't want to drink from it if there's any chance there was a snail or slug that fell in there. Okay. And then again, slime always comes up as a big deal. There are people who do think that they may have caught the disease from slime. Again, we don't know. We can't feed slime to a person and then say, okay, let's watch and see if they get sick. It's definitely been something that's been shown that rats can get infected. But again, there's a relationship between the number of worms that you get inside your body and how severe the disease is that you have the potential to have. So we don't know if you can get enough from the slime to actually get sick. So don't panic too much about slime. And one thing to keep in mind is that the parasites cannot survive being dried out. So if you have slime on something and then it dries out, it's no longer really going to be a serious case of a potential infection, right? There's not really going to be a lot in there. So don't get too wound up about this, but do know that, I've seen beauty products just recently that are made from slug slime. So don't watch any YouTube videos that tell you to put slugs or snails on your face for wrinkles. It's not a good idea. Okay. And then again, we're taking all of these steps to reduce our risk. So you want to eat your fruits and veggies. What can you do? You want to use clean running water, not soaking. Soaking is not a good, for rat lungworm, that's not a good method of cleaning your veggies. Use clean running water, not the salad spinner. You really got to do this by hand, each leaf, looking at it carefully, making sure there's no debris on that, no potential teeny tiny slug hiding in those greens. Again, drying, if you sort of let your veggies dry out, there's not, if there was anything on it, the parasite's not going to be able to survive. So drying is really good. And it's still possible to miss or snail or slug. These guys are really good at hiding in there. And mainly if you look at cultures that are tropical around the world, because there are so many parasitic foodborne diseases, you'll see that there's not a lot of folks that do leafy green salads. That might be a behavior, again, that's not as functional for us living here in the subtropics. Thinking about cooking your food or cooking your veggies so that you can get your veggies in a way that is safe, because even if you had a slug or snail in there, if you throw that in a soup and you boil that, you won't have any problems. There is a video online, and again, it's on our bisc.org/RLW page at the bottom. It's about a 10-minute video, and it was done by someone who is a survivor of rat lungworm through the Jarvie lab, that kind of can lead you through proper washing techniques. And so if you really do want to have those fresh raw veggies, I would recommend taking 10 minutes every few months. Watch it again, remind yourself. It's on YouTube, but this would be a great screenshot to take, and then you can follow that address. But this would be a way to kind of help understand that it's not, the Department of Health tagline, wash your veggies. We all wash our veggies, but I know that in the past, my way of washing my veggies was kind of like, throw them in the colander, turn the water on, just let it run, shake it out, it's fine. And this is more intensive than that. It is more work than that. It is not as simple as just, kind of getting your lettuce wet. So make sure that you think about taking those extra steps when you're going to prepare a salad with local greens. ways that you can just guarantee, I mean, you still want to wash it, you still want to like check it, but if you freeze it, this particularly for things like kale, things that are very curly, that have lots of hiding spaces, freezing it for 24 hours, cooking it for just 3 minutes at boiling temperature, or drying it out using a dehydrator. We did this with school gardens. Kale is one of the easiest things to grow in school gardens. Pretty much every school garden was growing kale. How do we keep the kids safe? We make kale chips, throw them in the oven, dry them out. The kids love it. It's like a snack, put a little salt, oil on it. It's delicious. And you know, use a dehydrator. Dehydrate those green veggies. Those are always, you know, I know someone who is quite sure that she got the disease through putting kale in her smoothies in the morning. She was trying to be very healthy. She's eating kale smoothies. And unfortunately, you know, you throw that in a blender and you're never going to see a tiny slug or snail in there. But if you freeze those greens for a couple of days and then, you know, you just take them out as you need in the morning, not only do they last longer, now you've prevented that problem from possibly interfering with your life. Okay. One thing is that people ask a lot about what can I do to wash the veggies, that they're hoping that there's some kind of magic solution, that if you put the solution on the veggies that immediately everything will die. There is research that's being done on this currently in Hilo, and so far nothing has been found. No commercially available or home remedies have been found to kill the parasite. And this is with taking parasites in a petri dish and dumping full strength the solution on the parasites. There's one commercial crop wash, which is not available as a veggie wash, and it's not available to the public, that has been found to have impact. Everything else doesn't really have an impact, or doesn't have enough of an impact. Things like salt water and bleach, having salt water that's salty enough to kill it, are not, they're not things that we generally would want to clean our veggies off. You don't want to use bleach and then eat it. The most common things that were asked about, apple cider vinegar. Remember that I said that the L3 larvae, those little curled up larvae that are in the slug or snail, are activated by stomach acid, because when the rat eats that slug or snail, they're in the stomach, they know, I'm back in the rat, it's time to go. We accidentally eat them, they get into our stomach, same stomach acid, hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is one of the strongest acids that exists. Apple cider vinegar is a weak acid. So the apple cider vinegar is giving it the same signal, like, yeah, let's move, but it's not going to kill it. It's actually going to make them active. So it's not a great use. And all of these other things have been tested: hydrogen peroxide, seawater, alcohol, neem oil. None of them have killed the parasite in a petri dish. So that don't think that there's any magic solution. You know, you got to put in the work, or, you know, to check, to cook, freeze. That's how you do it. There is a Facebook page called Hawaii Rat Lungworm Awareness. There are some people on there that are researchers, that are medical professionals, that are survivors, lots of survivors on that page. So if you have questions about red lungworm that are kind of odd, it's a great place to go. Just be careful the credentials of who's answering you, because sometimes people are answering questions that's like, you actually don't know. Usually someone will jump in and say, hey, don't do that here. But it is a place that you can kind of get some information, and generally it's a pretty supportive community. If you want more information, there's lots of rat lungworm information out there now. The Jarvie Lab is where we've gotten a lot of our lab, or a lot of our information. They have been sort of the leading researchers, you know, even in the world. They've been world-class research that has really driven a lot of rat lungworm research, because the Big Island of Hawaii is the hotspot for severe rat lungworm disease for the entire world. We have the most, so everyone's looking at us. But these guys have some great papers. You can actually download the research papers if you want to really get into that academic science language. So this is a great site for that. The Department of Ag has a page that has some really good information, especially if you're a farmer or a gardener. They have really specific information for that. One of my favorite pages is from the Extension Service of the university, CTAR. They just redid this page about 1.5 years ago and made it ADA compliant. And it really has everything categorized by like what your interest area in rat lungworm might be. So there's videos, there's downloads, there's handouts, there's all kinds of stuff on there. And I really, I like that page a lot. Puts a lot of information in there for you. And our page, bisc.org/RLW, you can find all of that. So if you scroll down on our page at the bottom are all those links I just talked about, handouts, from other places, all of the, sort of some news articles. So we try to make it sort of a one-stop place where you could get to all of that information, depending on what you needed. There's also resources for teachers there. So if you're an educator and you want to do something with rat lungworm in your classroom, we're going to be offering a professional development, 3-credit professional development class for this pretty soon. We were supposed to offer it in April, but things went south in April. So we're trying to figure out how to do this electronically and offer it online. And that, if you are interested in that, you can email us and I will put you on the list. Or if you know a teacher who might be interested in this, please pass that information on to them. But there are resources that you can access for the classroom. And that's the website. So easy, kind of easy, hopefully to remember. 2 eyes. And that's pretty much everything. And again, that's the email and website and phone number. So we're not in the office, so the phone number maybe isn't the best way to reach us, but feel free to reach out to us via Facebook. We're also on Instagram, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. So with that, I will kick it over to my team. And do you guys, is there any questions I need to address while we're here?
There's a good question. What about fermented foods? If there was a slug in there, would that kill it?
So we don't have research on that. However, talking to the researchers who did a lot of the water tests, anytime the water became stagnant or murky, the parasites did not do well. So if you were to, something, and again, that's kind of, when you look at tropical cultures around the world, how are they doing raw veggies? Kimchi, something like that, right? So if you're fermenting those foods for a long enough time, and that is anoxic, why am I not able to find this word? Where you don't have oxygen really getting into that mix, then you're gonna really reduce the amount of parasites. And so if you do it for a couple of weeks, you should be okay. But again, clean everything very carefully before you do that. Want to reduce that risk. Molly, you're muted. I didn't say anything yet. Oh, okay. All right.
Somebody asks also about garden earthworms. Are they a potential threat?
I have not seen any research that anyone found the parasite to be in earthworms. So not that we know of. Again, there's not, the parotenic hosts research is still very new, because we don't have a lot of background on that for Hawaii, for the things that are in Hawaii versus, where Thailand or other parts of Asia where this has been for a long time. We do know from those places that it was in frogs, which is why they looked at koki specifically, because it's well known that rat lungworm had a parotenic host in frogs. And unfortunately, we did find that koki frogs are parotenic hosts. You're not going to get it from handling them, but should you happen to eat a frog, that could be a problem. Cook that frog.
How big are semi-slugs?
So semi-slugs can, when they're little, they can be, just the tip of my fingernail, like they really tiny. But they get up to, I want to say, about 2 inches long when they're full grown. So, that's when you usually see them. I very rarely have found the teeny tiny ones, but obviously they're out there because there's a lot of adults. But yeah, they can be very tricky. They can be very small. And there's some slugs that is their full grown size is fingernail, like tip of the fingernail size. So again, any slug or snail can have the disease. So really have to be careful with our veggies to make sure we're not missing just that tiny little dot.
We had a person comment that they washed their lettuce 3 times last night and still managed to find a slug.
Oh, thank you for that comment, because, you know, we've heard that, and it's something we really want to get that message across. You know, we worked with the head of the Hawaii Community College agriculture program, and he has now converted all of his greens to hydroponics, and does, you know, very, like, this is part of the agriculture program. They're teaching the future farmers how to be very aware of slugs, because he had the same problem where he said the students would wash 3 times and it's still a slug at the end. And so he just said, we're doing away with growing this stuff in the garden beds. So I appreciate that you made that comment, because that is something that others have said as well.
And I believe you addressed this already, but is there anything natural that you can wash your greens with that will kill the parasite?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, bleach is natural in its way, but you don't want to wash your greens with that. There's nothing that right now, they've tested everything. And so again, the best thing they recommend is clean running water, right? Because that's really going to just rinse stuff off. So that's your best bet, is just using that clean running water, and being very, very careful with inspecting your greens. But there's no magic solution. And by solution, I literally mean liquid. There's no magic solution that's out there that will do it for these guys.
Eric asks about vermectin paste solution for human use.
Ivermectin is a dewormer that is for animals. And again, I'm not a medical professional. The medical guidelines indicate that parental pamoate is the one that it works best if you take it immediately after potential ingestion. And then there's a prescription medicine called albendazole. And usually, because of the issue with again, like, this is something you want to talk to a medical professional about, but from my discussions with them, one of the issues with the worms is that when they die in your body, they're causing inflammation, and the inflammation is part of what causes severe damage to the body. So it's your body's immune reaction that's like going crazy because it can't figure out how to deal with the worms even after the worms are dead. So ivermectin will kill worms in your digestive system, just like parental pamoate. I don't know of any research that says specifically whether they kill this particular worm, but it kills other worms like pinworms and stuff like that, or hookworms, roundworms. I'm trying to remember from my days working in an animal shelter. But if you're killing the worms that are already in different places in the body, you still have that inflammation response. So you really want to be under the care of a doctor who can then provide care for responding to that inflammation to prevent that long-term damage. So it's not something you want to try and treat on your own, with the exception of just getting that dose of pinworm medicine right away. And then, you know, that's not it. You go to the doctor, you take that immediately, but you also go to the doctor and you start the course of treatment as soon as possible. So I wouldn't try to handle it myself beyond that.
We had another comment that somebody found slugs in their aquaponic grow bed. So it just highlights the fact that you have to wash all of your vegetables. Nothing is safe. All we can do is reduce our risk.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the point. I think this can happen where we are looking, and you see it, everybody can see it now with COVID, right? You're looking for like, what's the magic bullet? And it's like, well, there's lots of steps, right? Reducing risk, like stay home as much as possible, and wear a mask when you are in public, and, you know, keep everything clean and use hand sanitizer. Like, all of those reduce risk. Like, nothing is the magic bullet. So when you're thinking about this disease, you have to think of it holistically. Like, what are all the different steps that I can take to just bring my risk down? And it's not something to be too like freaked out or afraid of or get caught up in. It's just sort of like, okay, what are the behaviors I need to incorporate to make sure that I'm keeping myself safe? And most of these behaviors are fairly simple. It's just a matter of changing our habits. So we have to remember, like, oh, right, I have to extra clean that salad.
Could you go back to the slide where it shows all the solutions that were tested to clean lettuce and greens?
That would be this one. So you can see things like garlic juice, 100% concentration, 0% immobility, which means that all the worms were totally fine. There was no immobility. These two here, these are the ones that are not available as, they're crop washes. They're not available as vegetable washes. And so we don't even know if they'd be safe. And then you have to remember, this is the first piece of the testing. So the first piece of the testing for this is, does the thing just, if I put it straight onto the parasite, does it kill the parasite? If it doesn't, I'm not even going to go to the next level of testing, which is, can I get enough of it on a salad or on a vegetable at a high enough concentration to coat the vegetable to kill any parasites that might be on there? That's like a next level, right? We don't even want to bother doing that with all these things if the thing doesn't die when it's straight in a petri dish. So even just because something is effective, those couple of things that they found that are effective, getting to the next level of testing to whether it would be effective in a salad situation and whether it would even be safe to eat, they haven't gotten there yet. So this isn't promising that vegetable washes are going to be your answer. Like, I wouldn't look to a vegetable wash as going to be the thing. I would look towards those other behaviors as being the directions that you want to go. That's the main point of this slide, is that don't count on a vegetable wash. And that's probably even in the future not going to be the answer to rat lungworm.
Very good. We have another question that's maybe too medical for us to answer, but is this different than other kind of worms that we get in our body? Like, are the life cycles different?
Yep.
And are there Hawaiian treatments or just medical doctors? And where can you find this information?
I would look at the Hilo Medical Center. The Hilo Medical Center, which has seen the most severe cases of disease, actually took a very leading role after a number of years of things being very uneven. John Martel, who runs the emergency department over there, he's a doctor, has been very involved in really pushing different, treatments and such. So Hilo Medical Center has a rat lungworm page, and they do have, which I believe is linked from our site as well. And they do have a survivors group that meets I think they're on Zoom now. They had kind of taken a hiatus with COVID, but I think they're trying to meet on Zoom. They meet once or twice a month, and they have the announcement there for how you can join that. And that often there's discussions there about potential medical treatments and what's happening in the medical field. No one that I know of has identified any Hawaiian treatments. Again, this is a disease that we only knew about in Hawaii and probably came around post-World War II when African snails came to Hawaii. That's most likely how we got it. So it's not something that maybe would have been identified in traditional Hawaiian medicine a long time ago, because it probably wasn't here. It's probably brought in by invasive species. But yeah, I don't know of any other treatments. I would highly, like, having talked to literally dozens of survivors who've had severe disease, I would highly recommend medical treatment. Do not try to treat this on your own. It can be a very serious disease, and the impacts, once the damage is done, they can be lifelong. There's no reversing it. It's really something you don't want to mess around with.
Could you talk a little bit about farm poultry eating slugs and being part of the life cycle?
Sure. We have not seen any evidence that chickens or ducks are affected by rat lungworm. So again, it does affect some bird species, but it appears, those animals will eat slugs and snails, and we don't have any reports of them having severe rat lungworm disease. It's unknown. There are lots of unknowns, but right now it's not thought that they are particularly susceptible to it. Some people do ask, if you eat the meat or the eggs, would that pass the parasite on? And it will not. The parasite has to be in that stage, and it has to be whole. And so when it's in the digestive system of the animal, and it's kind of trying to, in a bird or something, it's not going to be affected the same way that it's going to get out into the bloodstream the way it is with a mammal. because the digestive system of a bird is really different. So it's not going to get into the tissue. It's not going to get into the meat of the chicken. It's not going to pass to the eggs. It's not going to get into the reproductive system and pass to the eggs. But both of those things should be fully cooked before you eat them anyway. So for other foodborne diseases, right? So we don't want to do the Rocky thing with the raw eggs. We learned that's not a good idea. You shouldn't have any problems eating an animal that may have consumed a slug, unless it's something like a paratenic host, like a Tahitian prawn or a frog, something like that, that you might eat. A Tahitian prawn, you might eat ceviche, eat it raw. That could be a problem. Don't do that. Obviously snails, don't eat those raw. But if you're going to eat something that's cooked, you're fine anyway, but no, that won't pass through to those tissues.
We have a few questions on Facebook.
Okay.
So Laurel says, if we have poorly filtered catchment water and I'm concerned about larvae on dishes, does using the CDC bleach protocol for dishes offer any protection?
Yes, bleach will kill these parasites. Bleach will absolutely kill these parasites. So anything you bleach is going to be safe. And again, drying. So making sure that your dishes are, leave them on the drain board to dry, and that will be another layer of protection. And it's a good thing that you think about that bleach protocol. It's not just for rat lungworm, right? Like I said, there's a lot of, especially if you're on catchment, there's a lot of other waterborne diseases that you could end up with. So using that bleach protocol will also prevent all those other things that can come from water that are dangerous. And try to, if you can, talk to your landlord or whoever, who's handling your catchment system, and see if you can get that up to speed, because for many reasons, it's good to have good catchment.
She also brought up a great point about stepping on slugs and snails and why we kind of advise against that. Do you want to talk about that a little more?
Sure. Well, one thing that we usually say is that we want to get that thing, thinking from an invasive species control perspective, we always want to get that invasive species out of and I'm looking at the parasite as the invasive species in this case. We want to get it out of the environment. If you step on a slug or snail and you just keep going with your day, it's still available for a rat or something else to come along and eat it and pick up that parasite and continue the life cycle. So may not make a huge difference overall in, the scheme of the world, but generally we would say, get that thing out of the environment, put it in that boiling water or put it in the salty slug jug to get it out of the environment. So it's not available for any parasites that are in its tissues to continue their life cycle. The other thing is, hopefully you wouldn't step on a snail with bare feet, but there's always a risk that you could cut yourself with a shell. And we don't know if that's a potential way to introduce the parasite. So, just avoiding that, or having it on the ground where someone else could come along and step on it, probably best to avoid that if possible.
Is it really mostly leafy greens that we should be concerned with?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you should wash all your fruits and vegetables, but if you have a smooth skinned fruit or something that you don't eat the outside, chances are you're not going to have any problems seeing a slug or something stuck on it, and you'll be able to easily wash it off, right? If it's a banana, you're going to peel that banana and eat the inside. There's not going to be a slug or snail inside of that as long as the peel is intact. So, those things, you look at things like in Thailand where they have, rat lungworm is a part of the life there. You think about green papaya salad, you think about cucumber salad, like things where you can clean the skin and then you just sort of take the inside of that item and that's your fresh salad, right? It's not leafy greens. Most of the people that I've talked to who know that they bit into a slug, they were eating a leafy green salad or kale. For those cases that I've personally talked to people who got rat lungworm, they know it came from some kind of leafy green.
That's it for Facebook questions.
We have another comment. Could you quickly go over again how to capture and kill slugs in our yard?
Ooh, sure. It's one of our favorite topics. As an invasive species team, we love that. All right, so I'm going to put Kavehi's great video up here. And basically, Well, there was one more step that, you know, we do recommend is shelters. If you're growing, I mean, I don't have this in my backyard because I don't have a big growing area, but we recommend this at school gardens. So if you have a very productive garden, it's probably worth your time to set up a shelter. And that would be, again, creating a nice, damp, attractive little home so you can bring those snails and slugs in. Once you can use a little wet cat food to start it off and really get them interested. But once you get that started, they'll keep coming. And that can be a great place to sort of draw them in so you can collect them. And collecting them, again, we use tongs, I'll take chopsticks. You know, when I go out and I get chopsticks, I'll kind of clean them with my napkin and throw them in my purse. And then I take them home. And those are the chopsticks that I use because I like to recycle. Those are the chopsticks that I use to go out slug hunting at night. And I will collect slugs. And I have a slug jug I've been using salt water, although recently, like I said, a mycologist made me feel a little guilty about this. So I'm going to try using some boiling water next time, see how that works out. And really just putting those things into that jug. Whether you pour boiling water over it or you throw it into the salt water, very, very salty water, 6 parts water, 1 part salt, whatever you're using. And that's going to be a great way to get rid of them. Let that sit, you know, just keep using the same jug for a couple of weeks. And then when it gets nasty, you're like, okay, it's time to dump that out. You got to make sure everybody's dead in there. And the parasites don't survive in that yucky water. So you're not going to spread that out when you get rid of it.
And when you ingest the rat lungworm, it has to be the right life stage to affect us negatively.
Yes.
So if you somehow ingest the eggs, it's fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that's another theory as to why so many people in Puna may have had antibodies. It could be that we ingested different life cycles, so it didn't make us sick, but the DNA is still showing up in our blood. They don't know, but yes, you know, we get a lot of questions about rats. Rats are very serious pests. They can cause other very terrible diseases, but not rat lungworm. They're just part of the life cycle, but they won't cause rat lungworm disease for us. Still wouldn't eat my rats raw though. Make sure you cook them well.
Okay, we got a new question. Is there a risk of contamination if you touch the outside peel of a fruit that has been touched by a slug, then the insides, but touch the pieces of fruit with possibly contaminated hands, such as licking the juice off your fingers after touching contaminated fruit peels? So maybe like the slug slime.
Right. Yes, the potential is there. We don't know if you would get enough parasites to cause severe disease, but we certainly, when we're working with kids in the gardens, we do not have them ever lick their fingers or just eat raw anything from the garden. Everything is washed and clean. The kids have to wash their hands before and after. I mean, it's really best practices for all kinds of parasites and diseases, right? To not, you know, my husband, again, the man that told my daughter to drink out of the hose, the same man goes out in the garden and just sort of, he has different herbs that he'll just chew on that I'm like, hon, you have to wash those. Please stop going in the garden and just eating raw things. So I'm like, if you get rat lungworm because you didn't listen to me, then I'm divorcing you and I'm not going to care for you forever. So I would recommend that you wash everything. Best practice, wash everything coming from your garden. Don't stick your hands in your mouth. Even, you know, things like toxoplasmosis, which is another type of parasite that is associated with cats. One of the ways that they think toxoplasmosis is transmitted is, you know, most people will be working in their garden and, you know, just in the dirt, it's nice, whatever. If a cat has pooped in there, the parasite the eggs of toxoplasmosis parasite can be in there, and then people accidentally touch their face, or maybe they brush off their hands and they go in to have lunch and they're not thinking. So there's a lot of diseases that can be spread through us not washing our COVID that can be spread through us not washing our hands. Washing your hands is a very, very powerful way to prevent disease, and humans don't do it enough. So don't stick your fingers in your mouth if you're outside working.
Good advice, Franny.
It's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of things we don't know, folks, about rat lungworm, and I'm sorry to to not be able to give definitive answers on all of those things. You know, most of my answers are, you'll probably be okay, or that's probably okay, or that's probably not a good idea, because there's limited research on this disease, and it's because it's spreading around the world. There's more and more research that's going on, but you know, things just like with this new disease that we have, COVID, you know, you see things changing, and that's very typical of science, right? That's very typical of something that, as research develops, maybe an understanding we had before changes, or, oh wow, there's something new that we discovered that, you know, we didn't know it did that before. So you're seeing that same progression happen with rat lungworm. Even though we've known about it a long time, there wasn't a lot of research going on until maybe the last decade. So as we are doing more research, we're learning more. A lot of that information is just not out there right now. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Great. This session is being taped. It's available on our Facebook. It'll be available on the website. So yes, you can view it later at your leisure. And I think that might be it.
Okay, great. I will get to that last slide. If you want more info, you can go on to our Facebook, Instagram, website, email us. Right now, probably don't call, just because we don't necessarily have someone in the office at all times. But yeah, that's the best ways to reach us. And thank you all for being with us today. Molly, should I stop the recording now?
Yes, yes. Thank you, everybody.